Buckle up. You're about to hear something you won't forget.
1, 2, 3, 4.
If you wish to understand the secrets of the universe, think.
This isn't your typical small talk. This is Lift Talk.
The only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good people to do nothing.
Ever had such a good conversation you didn't want the ride to end?
In terms of energy, frequency,
From the streets of Denver to your ears, welcome to the conversations that only happen in a lift.
and vibration.
3 years ago, I quit my comfortable, well-paying job in tech. Although the money was great, I couldn't shake the feeling I was meant to be somewhere else. Eventually, I found myself out of money. Needing quick cash, I started driving for the rideshare app Lyft. I'm Sean McMahon, and you're listening to Lift Talk.
2, 1.
All right, so Rob, you're a pediatrician.
I am.
You were in town for the pediatric convention.
Correct. The American Academy of Pediatrics.
Right on.
National convention is here. We're excited about it. It's going to be a fun week.
So you guys are just going to party for a week, huh?
That's all we do. So it's, I can't imagine what we'll talk about. It's been a fairly eventful week here lately.
What do you mean?
Oh, with all the news on vaccinations and things like that going around. It'll be something we'll discuss. So how long have you been driving?
Today? Or you mean like life in general?
Life in general.
I've been doing this for about a year and a half now. Just passing the 1.5 year mark.
You a native Colorado?
I am, yeah. Born and raised. Yeah. I used to be in consulting and quit that about 3 years ago now. Thought it'd be better to maybe do a job that... Well, I didn't know what I was going to do at the time. I just knew I couldn't do that anymore. I actually took the MCAT a little while ago.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah.
That's exciting.
I don't think I'm going to go to med school, though. Well, it was fun to take. It was nice to be studying again.
I always tell people my advice for the MCAT is to make sure you show up on time.
Yeah.
Because when I took it, the year I took it, they had changed the start time from 9 o'clock to 8 o'clock in the morning. So everything I studied said be there at 9 o'clock.
So you got there an hour late.
So I showed up. I thought I was early. I was about 20, 30 minutes early. And I almost didn't get in.
Oh my gosh.
You made it. So here I am.
So what's the current state of healthcare? Vaccines and I don't watch the news, Rob, so you have to catch me up.
Oh, okay. So there's a lot of debate going on about the new administration and what they're setting forth about vaccine policy and trying to create their own science, if you will.
Gotcha.
That message sells to a lot of folks, and we've got to figure out how we can convince people that what we do is good. So I feel like we're defending ourselves. We're back on our heels a little bit more every day.
The medical profession, pediatrics.
Professionals, yeah. The pediatricians, family physicians, really everybody feels a little on their heels here lately. And so this is a great time to kind of get together and for us to kind of talk about what's working, what's not working, and how we can, for pediatricians, what we can do to be the best for our kids.
Sure.
So when you thought about you took the MCAT, you thought about it. Did you have a career in mind or something you wanted to pursue?
Yeah, I wanted to go into osteopathy.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was really fascinating. And I grow herbs and I like to garden a lot too.
Yeah.
And so I thought I wanted to try to run a practice far away from pharmaceuticals where possible.
Yeah. Well, that is...
Yeah.
I think there's a trend amongst all of us to try to do the least amount of interventions that we can, especially, if they're not cost effective, if they're really not effective at all. We see so much kind of polypharmacy and things like that going on.
Yeah.
I'm
not familiar with the term polypharmacy.
Oh,
what is that?
that means taking a lot of medicines.
Gotcha.
You know?
Okay. Yeah.
Well, even if it's a cold, you'll take 3 or 4 different things, or people will chase down several different things to treat behavioral issues that may not necessarily need all that. So, yeah, and I had an interesting conversation with a osteopathic doctor the other day.
Oh, no
Because
kidding.
we were talking about, when you get your DO and you're trained a little bit in the OMT, and a lot of people learn that in school, but then they go on to do their residency training in an MD facility, and so they never really practice or take that into their career, because there's not that many training programs that take the DO, the osteopathic training, and further that. So.
Yeah, it's pretty fascinating how like all of medicine has really adopted. I mean, I guess our world has adopted that idea of like specialties, really focusing on like a specific part. And at least in my studies, I mean, obviously I don't have your experience or anything, but at least in my study, it seemed so much of the curriculum in preparation for the MCAT seemed heavy on chemistry, and then heavy on each individual part, and just a glaring hole on the whole, on how all of the systems came together. I don't know if you're familiar with like systems theory or anything, but I was reading some books on systems theory at the time, and it just seemed like the medical literature was missing any sort of.
I think you're seeing more of that, and you're seeing people who can be trained now in culinary medicine, for instance, is something that's on the rise a little bit.
Oh, that sounds intriguing.
And
like food as medicine.
Yeah, and
that's cool.
How you can, as a preventative or even treatment.
Yeah.
So you see some training that's starting to prop up around the country, and I've had a couple of my friends show interest in doing something like that. I'm too old to kind of redirect that now, but it's fun to talk about and learn about. And I think there's been a big change in how you train doctors in medical school. Not as dramatic as that, perhaps, but it used to be the old classic system where you spent the first 2 years in the books, chemistry, and then they threw you patients. But now I think we're getting people involved a little earlier, and with the emphasis on treating learning how to treat and communicate with patients and appreciate a little bit more the whole picture, while you learn the other important parts of it too.
Sure. Oh, that's good to hear. It's a bummer we can't figure out the financing aspect. It blows my mind. We have such like a shortage in the medical field in general, and yet a lot of the younger doctors I've driven tell me they're like $250,000, $300,000 in the hole. It's just like, how is that possible? Like paying off student loans for the rest of their lives.
The school, when I went, I paid between $5,000 to $7,000 a year.
And that's 4-year program.
Yeah, and that was each year times 4. So the total, so the total came out, I don't know, 25, 30, something like that.
That's wild.
And so that, even with inflation back then, that was manageable, right?
Yeah.
But now that my same school charges, I think, $65 to $70 a year.
Yeah.
And it's crazy. So yeah, we do have a problem with that. And so glad to see some of these folks who are sponsoring tuition-free schools and things like that.
Yeah. John Hopkins, right? I
think they may have done that recently. I think it started in New York. I believe it was the Icahn School of Medicine. I could be wrong. That did that. So I think when you can graduate debt-free, just like anything else, when you're debt-free, you can be a little more free with what you want to explore.
Definitely.
I think a lot of people come out high in debt and they look at, I want to be a radiologist or a surgeon. I got to pay this money back. But what we really need is people who can get in the community, especially in the rural areas, and be a primary care physician, family practice, pediatrician, intern, whatever.
Yeah.
There's lots of needs out there. We can't fill them.
Interesting. So from your perspective, so let's do a little background on like your practice. So where do you, if you don't mind, like where do you practice?
So I spent I always have fun getting back in the mountains. But I started my career in Utah.
Okay.
And I spent the first 2 years in Utah, but I was originally a Tennessean. And so I came back to Nashville, and I've always done primary care pediatrics. And I did that in the Nashville area up until the time of the pandemic. And because I was in the middle of a transition of practice of the pandemic, and everything just kind of went sideways. So I ended up back where I am now, which is at Vanderbilt University Children's Hospital.
Oh, yeah.
So, and actually, it's what I do. I'm a medical director for a foundation that does a lot of education, a little bit of research, but what we're really concentrating on now is trying to improve healthcare in our rural areas of Tennessee. And so we had a grant to work on access to care. And now we're working on a newer grant that's the same idea, but it really focused more on mental health care.
Okay.
Which is so big. And so how can we create a collaboration between mental health specialists and primary care doctors, especially in rural areas, because that need is universal. And we need a better system in place to get the people the help that they need.
I mean, it like conceptually makes sense, right? But can you give me like a specific example as to like a patient who would benefit from their primary care physician talking with their mental health professional?
So I'll give you an example of just the other day when I went to visit a practice that was in a small town in Tennessee. And interestingly enough, they have a couple of counselors there, but even the other physician group in town tends to send any patient with mental health problems to them, even though they have a kind of a lower level of training, if you will, because I guess they feel like they don't have the time to really do it justice, but they're a little overwhelmed. And so
the people who
are getting those referrals,
gotcha,
because they're still trying to do a primary care clinic, and to have somebody with bipolar disorder who comes into their clinic and has issues, it's kind of, I got to stop. If you need help, I got to stop. Drop everything and attend to this. And sometimes, they're getting a little more comfortable with, okay, I can feel more comfortable counseling and doing some medication if you're absolutely needed. But what they were able to do is call a referral line that the state of Tennessee has, which puts them in touch with the social worker who starts the counseling process and then connects them with the services that they need. And that may sound kind of simple, but without that, I mean, they weren't sure what to do that particular day. So it gave them a direction to try to help this family.
It's a starting point on the whole journey. Yeah.
It's surprising how many people really come in, not just with mental health needs, but in mental health crisis. And it's hard as a primary care doctor to address significant mental health, because really they don't come in until they get to that point sometimes. So yeah, you've got to you got a lot of energy you got to put into that, and it helps. Some of the newer models are, having a relationship with a counselor that might be available via telemedicine. So they may not be in your small town, but they may be in Knoxville or Nashville or places like that.
Sure.
And you can, they can have a virtual consult with them, or you even, pair with somebody who you put in your office if you got an extra room or two, and they do it once a week or twice a week. Somebody you can introduce your folks to and say, here's somebody who's going to help you. We're going to work together and we communicate together. Like I say, we need more of that, but to use your word again, the system just isn't there. As widespread as it should be.
Makes sense. The system being like
the access.
The access.
The access. If you're in Nashville proper, you may have plenty of people that you can go to for help, but even then, they may not take your insurance, and for a lot of people, it may be cost prohibitive.
Right.
I've seen people, if you miss an appointment, charging you $250 or $300 if you can't get in. Well, you may have traumatic events or other things that keep you from getting there. So creating another financial barrier is another part of that. So, like anything, it's a mix of trying to find what works, but also finding the funding for it. what we're trying to do with this grant is we've been given some money to try to figure out what works, and then maybe we can sell that back to the state government and say, look, I think this system works. We need to fund this better care system for folks. And to your point, it's not always medicine. It could be a lot of other things that we can do as far as lifestyle and counseling. Just got to have it available to us.
Yeah, that makes sense. So your organization or your foundation is using this money as to kind of like create a pilot.
Correct.
Okay,
Yeah,
I'm with
so
you.
We're going to analyze what system tends to work best in smaller practices in rural areas. What fits their needs a little bit better, and then we're going to try to see what are the results. And some of that's as simple: are the doctors more satisfied, or the patients more satisfied? But, are there less ER visits for mental health crisis, less psychiatric admissions? So we'll see. We're actually just rolling this out here in the last couple of months. So it's a long project.
So it sounds like, and I'm not passing any judgments, please don't take it that way, but it sounds like you're still trying to figure out even what your success metrics are, if that makes sense.
What is? I'm sorry.
Your success metrics, like what
Exactly.
like what you're measuring to be like, this works.
Right. And there have been some studies that have done that, and so we're going to learn from that.
Yeah.
But we want to learn what works for the practitioners who are out there. If they're telling me that this is amazing, I can get people in. I feel more comfortable with the treatment they have. I think that's one thing we want to measure. But we can tick off as many things as we can to prove our point that we think this works. And hopefully we can go in front of the people that make those money decisions and say, this is something we should be funding. And not to say that it doesn't exist. Certainly the state of Tennessee and other states, some are better than others, are funding these sorts of things. But there's still a lot of inequality in access, socioeconomic inequality.
Yeah.
And so you got to figure out how to do better.
Oh, I love that you're working on it. So are you focusing, you said bipolar earlier, are you focusing on that? You're really just focusing on...
It's really, the most common thing by and large, well, there's a couple things.
Yeah.
If you really get into the broad spectrum, if you talk about younger children, we're talking about developmental issues like autism. And how can we address that and get early intervention for those children to succeed? And then when you get, not only in young children, but then the adolescents, the teenagers, we start to see a lot of anxiety and depression. More serious things like bipolar is out there, but not in the same frequency. I just threw that out as what we had run across the other day. But
Sure, I'm with you. Have you, now that you bring it up, have you ever heard of the Telepathy Tapes?
I don't think I have. Yeah, tell me about
So
that.
it's wild. Maybe you want to check it out just for fun. But there's long story short, this documentary filmmaker heard a doctor from Harvard on a podcast talking about kind of her specialty and what's really pulled her in the last 20 years. And the Telepathy Tapes is a podcast that this documentary filmmaker made, detailing her journey and research into nonverbal autistic children and how they essentially it starts as a bunch of these parents were raising their hands saying, hey, I think my child can read my mind. And, traditional medicine dismissed it as like, that's not possible.
Right.
These people are shells, blah, 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 blah. Well, as the podcast goes on, it's phenomenal. Like, as she starts to investigate this, like by episode 2 or 3, I won't spoil it for you if you want to listen to it, but by like episode 2 or 3, one of the kids who they're communicating with, because they all get iPads and then they get that spelling technology or whatever now. One of the kids talks about what it's so frustrating at school that I have to learn to communicate when, everyone I know and everyone I associate with, we all just communicate using our minds. And so the documentary filmmaker's like, wait, who's we? Like, who is this child talking about? Like, we? Like, clearly they're not just, we is a bigger term than just you and your mom, like what's happening. And by episode 3 or 4, I think you get to the place where there's this spot where they call it the hill. And at any one time, like 2,000 or 4,000 of these kids all show up at the same time every day. You know, they're in their rooms, you know, like they're all scattered across the world. But they meet at a place called The Hill to teach each other things. And so it was like this whole idea where, like, you're probably familiar, you know, but non-autistic kids, for the large part, were treated as like they couldn't get past a kindergarten level education.
Right.
And so a lot of them talk about how, like, yeah, I've been taught how to spell and read and, you know, what shapes are for like 12 years in a row. But it wasn't until I started going to The Hill that someone taught me French or someone taught me Beethoven's, you know, symphony. And so it's just this wild kind of wild thing where they run all these tests and they do all these things. And one of the kids I think passes, and his best friend is like in Oregon. And so after he passes, the parents go to meet the best friend who's never left Oregon in his life. And the kid tells them all these moments about, like, their now, you know, deceased child, how great he was. It's moving. It's wild.
That is pretty wild.
Comprehension and consciousness. Yeah. It's going to be a crazy decade.
And you wonder if you fast forward 100 years, what we'll look back on, and like we have every 100 years, the things that didn't seem possible and now it seems common.
Yeah. Yeah, I had been exposed to the idea like a year and a half ago that, like, that's the future of all communication is like telepathy. Like, verbal communication is incredibly inefficient as a species intelligence rises. Anyway, well, that's cool. You're working on it. I hope you find it out. I wonder if there's any literature in like rural India and Africa too that you guys can benefit from or pull from, because you know they have like similar issues out there.
Yeah, you've got to be open to everything. I do feel like, unfortunately, and again, you don't watch the news, but there's a lot of political isolationism right now, where especially a lot of very brilliant teachers, physicians, you know, they're not as likely to come or interact across borders like we used to. That there's a little bit, I won't call it loss of goodwill, but maybe that is a way to put it.
I think that's a good way to put it. Yeah. Loss of goodwill, fear.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, no matter how you feel about administration, I think that's one thing that we've got to do away with that. We've got to get back. Everyone's got to work together on the same page to improve our quality of life, improve our health.
I think that's really hard to do. I mean, I agree. I'm with you. I think we need to do it, but, you know, I kind of backdrop this. Like, I think sometimes people don't see problems until you can put words to them, you know, until you can like pontificate on, here's what I see. And I wouldn't just say this afflicts the medical industry. I think it afflicts like our society as a whole right now. But we're kind of in this, what I would call like, and it's not my terminology, but what I've heard is called as like a corporate cartel run world. And I think like, that's what I mean. It's like, I think, if I were a sociopathic CEO who ran a very large pharmaceutical company, anytime one of you do-gooders, is what I would call pediatricians or, you know, anyone, started causing issues for me, I would use the legal system to start jeopardizing your license, because that's going to shut you down very quickly. Your inability to practice legally.
Right.
And that gives you that puts leverage against all of you, unfortunately.
Well, I agree. I mean, I think that's a great way to sum it up. Is that there's a little bit of that political pressure, really.
Totally.
Shut down to get my agenda done. I will shut down the opposition. I will silence them, discredit them. And I think, you know, to be honest with you, when it comes to the science part of it, I think, you know, people pointed out, relatively, I say that carefully, relatively scientifically, we'll say illiterate, but poorly literate, and it's hard for us to interpret a lot of it sometimes.
You mean people as a whole? You mean?
No, not people as a whole, but if you look at the country.
Oh, I got you.
And so when you're trying to explain something that should make sense, and as physicians and other things, you found that about 50, we're about divided evenly, but about 50% get it, and the other 50%, they're more likely to fall to, like you said, the people trying to silence, because they'll use big words and use things that kind of make a connection with you, with your experience, I guess. And so if you feel that bond, and they feel that, it's hard to decipher who's right and who's wrong, and you're going to go with your gut feelings and what feels right to you. Does that make sense?
I think so, yeah. So to say it back, people will often go with what feels best, not what is logically being said or what the evidence points to.
There's a little bit of confirmation bias in that. It's like, I thought that's what was going on, and that makes sense.
Sure.
Rather than kind of look at it as like, well, when we look at it evenly across the board, what makes more sense? And that's hard. And that's hard to communicate to people because, again, it's emotion. And, of course, then politics play a role. And somebody told me, when you mix politics and medicine, you get politics. You could substitute healthcare for medicine, too, just in general.
Yeah. So how long have you been a pediatrician?
So about 30 years. 29, I think, if I'm counting it out perfectly. So.
Okay. And when, in general terms work, but when is this like medicine being political is a new thing? And if so, like when do you remember it really starting to be politicized?
I would say,
like
so many of the things that started to kind of divide us, I would say after about the 2000 election. I mean, you saw it in the 90s, but then, and people, there's always been a group of people that firmly have written in that camp of, I'm not going to believe what the mainstream medical community will tell me. And that's always going to be, that's been around since the beginning of time.
Sure.
And I hate to say it, I think it's probably, if you look at the 2000s and the mid-2000s, it's kind of when social media became a great validator for certain things. Algorithms made you only see what you kind of wanted to see or lean towards. And to me, that kind of intensified it and took people who were on the edge and kind of moved them further into one camp or the other. I think it's done that to our politics too, to our feelings of how we try to run a country. It's kind of pushed us into that because we see what we feel and what we want to see, and it just kind of continues that confirmation in our minds. I don't know if you agree with that or not, but it's certainly in the time frame of things is when I've seen it worsen.
It's not that I disagree with you. I have a very different take, right? Like I was born in the 90s, not to date myself. So I'm one of the last generations, I guess, who grew up without a phone before, a smartphone before I was 14, 15. But by 18, I had a phone. And so it's hard for me to remember what life was like pre-internet. Because even pre-internet, we had television, you had the news. You just had, the rapid movement of information. It's interesting, that you bring up 2000 and the adoption of social media that's really changed it. I'm always blown away, having studied, to take the MCAT and then taking the MCAT, and seriously considering going to medical school. I'm to your note earlier about the big words, like I'm always kind of flabbergasted how how science in general has an inability to talk to the common person. Like it just blows my mind.
And that is why we have lost that battle. This will be a lot of what we talk about at this meeting. And there's very few that do it well, but what I'm encouraged by over the last 1 to 2 years is I'm seeing people that have that ability and that talent are stepping up. And so now we're starting to see people that can communicate better science and healthcare topics. And I'm going to be interested to see if that helps kind of turn the tide. But you're right, for the last, predate that by the last 20 years. I'll be honest with you, I had a mom, we had this discussion in a clinic probably about a year ago.
Yeah.
And she said, well, everyone tells me I should do this. I said, I know, but we tend to believe this works more. It's a better approach. And she said, how come y'all suck at this so bad? How come you cannot? I know. And I said, you're right. We're losing the information war when it comes to that, and we've got to do better. And I think slowly we'll get there. And like I said, I'm starting to see some people, some who will be here at this conference, that can really have that talent. We do a lot of that. We do a lot of that production for education. I can lead a conversation, but I don't have the talent and the charisma to do it beautifully like some of my colleagues do. So I always try to bring people who do have that talent in. I can just be the person that leads the conversation or fields the questions. But yeah, it does take that talent, I think. So.
Yeah, charisma can be a dangerous thing.
Yeah.
Interesting.
There's people that I think can use their charisma, well, like anything. You can use it wisely, or you can use it nefariously.
Yeah. I don't mean to dog on medicine either. The more I think about this, the more I understand, obviously medicine doesn't just operate in a vacuum. There are all these outside, to your point, politics, malpractice insurance is definitely a thing, right? So it's to
be fair, we never, for years in the 60s, 70s, and 80s, medicine practiced in a sense of arrogance. Right? You were, we joke about it now, but still, there was a time when you were the doctor and this is what you said and everything went your way. You never had to kind of think about different approaches or different, this is the way I've always done it and that should work.
You're right.
And so, again, if there's a positive to that, to being challenged, it's making you think outside the box of what works outside of just the traditional things that we've always done. What works in some of the alternative forms of medicine, what doesn't work. Where does acupuncture play a role? Where does chiropractic play a role? And manipulation and all those sorts of things.
Yeah.
So that's all I like.
You took the thought thread right out of my head, because it wasn't until, so I just think about my own self, right, and my own experience. And a couple of years ago, I had this recurring bout of bacterial infection. So I was on antibiotics straight for, I don't even know, 5-6 months, on and off, trying to just get the infection gone or whatever. And it was primarily sinal things. And then I got pneumonia at one point, and people were like, oh, it's probably from COVID. And it was I don't think I had COVID at any point during any of this. I have no idea what you guys are talking about. But it wasn't until I started going to an acupuncturist and a friend of mine where he was like, okay, every time they prescribed you antibiotics, they're also telling you to take probiotics as well, replenish the gut biome. And it was no, I've been in and out of doctor's offices for 6 months now, and nobody's ever told me that except you. So there's going back to that whole system theories, to your point, how everything, what I would say from an outsider, not that you're looking for free advice, but from an outsider perspective, this is not a problem that medicine can solve by itself. And so it's really cool that you guys are all getting together in a convention and talking among a bunch of doctors, but maybe you guys are in your own echo chamber and you need outsiders who are not doctors per se
and
to
that's
help.
the point I'm trying to make. If
Yeah.
we listen to the challenges a little bit more and make ourselves better equipped to listen when we need to listen and challenge when we need to push back when we need to push back. Because some of the things we do, I think are amazing. And some of the history of medicine and what we've been able to do is amazing.
Can you give me some examples? Like, what do you think about?
Well, and again, you may agree or disagree, but I mean, getting back to immunizations, I mean, eradication of polio and almost eradication of measles and things like that, those sorts of things, and being able to improve the health of people in third world countries through immunization. So those are great public health measures. I mean, leading that way in public sanitation and all those sorts of things in public health are wonderful. Then there are some things I think where we
can we pause there for a second?
Go ahead.
What's so interesting is I've read Disillusioned, and it was by a doctor. I don't know if you've heard of it. She took a lot of flack during COVID, and she kind of charts out the history of immunizations, and she talks about how they're kind of like the golden child of medicine, that all doctors are convinced immunizations work. And the reason I bring this up is I'm not so convinced on the science or the evidence right now. And I drove a guy. Huh?
You're in good company.
Let's get back to that. I drove a guy just 3 or 4 weeks ago who said he had polio. And I mean, he was clearly, I don't know the proper political terms. I'll just say it. Like, he was clearly deformed. Like, he clearly had trouble moving and getting around. And he had talked about how he had had polio for like 35 years. And we talked about his experience in medicine. And he was like, no, like, anytime I get a new doctor, and he's on, government assistance, medical care. Mm-hmm. And so he's like, I get new doctors, I get all the fresh bees. So I get new doctors every 2 years or so. He's like, they all start the same way. Like, they come in, I tell them I have polio, and they tell me, no, I don't. And he's just like, I've literally had polio for 35 years. Like, I had it when I was a child. I don't know how to convince them, like, I do have it. And it's not until we do tests and they try different medications that a couple months in, they're always like, yeah, maybe you do have polio.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
And so it's just one, I would just say, I think the evidence that polio has been eradicated is flimsy at best,
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
To that point, I mean, yes, you're correct. It is still out there. I mean,
yeah.
We obviously see that with travel. And part of that we can blame on policy, because it's clear to a lot of people that there are 3 big types of polio. Okay, one of them in particular, if it's allowed to circulate, kind of mutates probably a bad word, but reverts back to its more virulent form. So in other words, the oral polio vaccine, when we give it, people shed it. Okay, in other words, they're basically pooping it out, and it can be spread.
Oh, it doesn't stay in the body.
It's supposed to be a benign, but over time that can revert back to being virulent, and now you have polio cases again. So you may still see, a reduction in the amount of paralysis in third world countries. That's not a PC word. I shouldn't say third world anymore, but in developing areas. But if we went to the other vaccine, which is totally inactivated, totally killed vaccine, then I think we would do better. We would have fewer cases, and it wouldn't, let me put it, this is hard principle to explain. It wouldn't prevent infection, because yes, it probably takes an oral vaccine to attack it in the gut, but it prevents it from getting into the nervous system and causing the paralysis and what we consider true polio.
Gotcha.
But for some reason, the WHO still pounds on giving, and I get it, because it's easier to get oral vaccines to these places, but it's still circulating. There's a case in New York City several years ago, and this was a man with paralysis or paralytic polio. For every 1 case of paralysis caused by polio, there's probably about 1,000 infections that were either mildly symptomatic but didn't cause anything, or asymptomatic. So
they had it, but just no signs.
Yeah, and if you go into these places, and one of the things that's not widespread, you measure wastewater. You can test polio in the wastewater. There might be a single case out there, but you may find polio in the wastewater, meaning, again, it's in the community, and it could resurge at any point.
So polio is a virus.
It is a virus.
Okay,
yes.
so it can't survive without a host.
So it's a lot of hand-to-mouth transmission, things like that. But it can also have a respiratory component to it as well.
I wish I had my copy of Disillusion. I'd give it to you and then follow up with you and ask your opinion on it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because there's some pictures in there from like the early 1900s, and it talks a lot about there's this interesting, say it's a coincidence or just divine timing, as it were. But she talks about how vaccines were primarily tested and rolled out right as we started developing sanitation and sewage systems. And so she, I wouldn't say she makes the argument, but she points out her big thing is like, I don't think we educate people enough on the true effectiveness of vaccines. And part of her thing is, and it's because I don't think we really know how effective vaccines actually are. And it's partially because when we rolled out all these vaccines, one, doctors, just back then didn't record if the vaccine necessarily had bad effects. And two, a lot of the benefits we saw attributed to vaccines were actually from increased sanitation and just cleanliness.
I think the truth probably lies somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
And for instance, the measles outbreak that we've had this year, if you look historically about the number of children that should have died, we only had 2, fortunately, should have been a little bit higher. And that probably has to do, people claim it's underreported, but that, part of that I think has to do with better medical care, and maybe better sanitation, all those sorts of things. But you can't go to the other extreme, I don't believe, and dismiss it and say, oh, now that we have better sanitation techniques and better medical care, that we can not rely on vaccination. I think the problem that really makes it difficult is that vaccinations, it's not, hey, I give you one and you're covered, right? We saw that, and we totally blew COVID and how we communicated that, because we knew most of the people that were in the community of developing vaccines knew that you weren't going to eradicate COVID. You were going to prevent a lot of deaths and things like that. But COVID was still going to be COVID, because there's been coronavirus doing this for hundreds and hundreds of thousands of years. But yeah, without these, I think, we're going to be much, much worse off. I was going somewhere else with that, and I totally lost my train of thought. But
it's okay. It'll come back. When it comes back,
right.
Just jump in. Well, it was so interesting. It's like, from my understanding, medicine loves the double-blind study. And yet, I'm not aware of a vaccine double-blind study anywhere. And so it's just fascinating that it's like, everywhere else, this is the gold standard, except when it comes to immunizations. And then I hear everyone talks in a similar thought brain that, where you're at. And we don't know.
Now where, with institutional review board and ethics board, it's hard to say we've got this therapeutic preventative that works. We know it decreases. So how ethical is it then to run a double-blind study and say, oh, you will be withheld the treatment? It might be exposed to it, polio or measles or whatever. And then trying to do an equitable study of everyone with the same sort of confounding factors or biases, I guess is the word I'm looking for. How are you going to enroll enough? Because somebody say, well, I don't want to be in the vaccination group, but if you do that whole randomized controlled trial, you may get a vaccine. You may get a placebo, you may get a vaccine. So we're just at a stage where that makes it very difficult on every new vaccine. So what we leave ourselves with is we do comparison studies, or what a lot of people will call non-inferiority studies and whatnot, say, does this perform as well as what now is the, quote, standard? So it's sort of vaccine versus vaccine. But does that make sense? Because to withhold it, there's going to be a sense of, I don't know if that study can be done.
I'm with you because of the ethical concerns. Like, people aren't lab rats. We don't want to. Right. Yeah, I'm with you.
So if you do that study and somebody dies of measles, you're like, oh shit, that was terrible. We shouldn't have done that.
Which would probably, frankly, be what happens.
Yeah.
Right. If you give a strong enough vaccine, measles, like, somebody's going to get it, and the chances of death are, I don't know what the chances are on a good strain of measles, but I don't imagine it's very low. So you said a comparative study. Are there other things in medicine where we use comparative studies, or is it just for immunizations?
I'm sure there are, as far as the pharmacology goes. I'm sure there's medications that treat things like tuberculosis and things like that, where they just, I'm throwing this out as an example. I can't think of a specific offhand, but where you would compare rates of improvement or rates of complication. like every study, you always first look at, are there any side effects? Is this medicine making people sick? Is it worth going? The next level, okay, how do we compare it? So there are certainly situations where you can absolutely do a double-blind placebo-controlled trial, and that makes sense in certain low-risk situations. But again, if you're treating something like tuberculosis, I think it's hard to do that in an endemic area, in an area where the disease exists. But
Interesting. Yeah.
So it does, and I think if you look at that from the outside, from your perspective, it says, why doesn't that make sense? And we would say, okay, that would be awesome if we could do that, but nobody would feel good about doing that.
Because just to say it, the backdrop idea is we know immunizations work.
Right. And
which we don't.
Yeah. Well, no, you're not getting away with that one. Nice one. No, they work, and we can, there's all sorts of nuances in that. How well do they work? And that's where I think, again, we did, again, getting back to COVID, we did a crappy job. We bought into the idea when those things, it was 90% going to prevent, and that's what the public heard, is going to prevent COVID. But any respiratory virus like that, it's hard to contain. It mutates, it changes, just like influenza does every year. So we're not going to prevent every case, but in the complexities of the immune system, if we do that, what it does is it primes your body. Because a lot of the complications come from how long it's in the body. So if it hits you in the first 3 days and causes symptoms, I can't wake this immune system, the memory of the vaccine can't wake up quick enough. But if we're talking about long COVID or a lot of the pneumonias and the real immunologic complications that we saw, the same would hold true. Well, for instance, why measles is such an effective vaccine is because a lot of its stuff happens later. Encephalitis and those sorts of things. And by then, a few days in, a week in, that the memory part of the immune system, which again, I don't want to get too deep, but something called T cells, which are a little different from the B cells that produce the antibodies. They can help recognize things, and it's a late defense, but it's the defense against the more serious one. That's where I would say vaccines work.
T cells.
You can easily make an argument and say, well, this vaccine doesn't work because everyone's still getting sick with that disease. And again, it's a very nuanced discussion. We've got to do a better job of how we communicate to people. So anyway, you've probably heard enough.
No, I appreciate it a lot. It's if
my wife was here, she would be sitting here saying, "You triggered him. Just triggered him. He's going to talk about it all night." This is great.
I didn't mean to trigger you.
No. I'm kidding.
What's so interesting is to me. So, give you some background. So, I used to be in like big data management and consulting, and so I don't know how familiar you are with any of that, but there are things out there that are called essentially personalization engines, and every ad network, every advertisement you've ever seen probably functions off some of that now, where you see specific advertisements that are tailored to you versus, I see something different. And a black woman who's 19 would see something completely different, right? Because they're tailoring the message to who's watching. I completely forgot what I was going to say. Oh, what's so interesting is, nope, completely forgot what I was going to say. I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
What I was going to say is, in my old profession, a big thing of us was rapidly iterate and test, right? It's kind of the old Facebook, like, move quick and break shit. And obviously you can't do that in medicine for various reasons, obviously. But it's just so interesting how, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but what I'm hearing is, doctors themselves would love a double-blind study to check specific vaccines or versions of vaccines. You mentioned 2 different versions of like polio vaccine, for example. You all would be excited, maybe not excited, but you would find value in a double-blind study for the vaccines.
Everyone would say that's a pure way to do it, but we're past that point.
Well, and that's what's so interesting is like, I don't think the public knows that decision has been made on your side of the fence. You know, because in my side of the fence, we didn't need permission, right? We were crazy tech. It was like, well, let's just run 1 million experiments a day at these huge ad networks, and nobody's the wiser, and we can learn some crazy stuff. And in medicine, I guess this is what I'm getting at, is in medicine, you guys make these decisions like, well, we're past that point. We can't do that. And I think what I would throw into your mix as you go to these conferences, I think there is a younger generation now who might be more open to, yeah, you can experiment on me. Let's try this. Let's see what happens. And we have the technology maybe for the first time in history to actually do that.
Universities where there's lawyers that will say, you cannot do that.
Exactly.
We cannot
full circle right back into the malpractice. Yeah. So it's this interesting thing where like, now you know a little bit more about how I see the world, and I see the world through this like, well, let's rapidly iterate and test as much as we can, as quickly as we can. And so much of the world doesn't function that way because of lawyers. We'll pin it on the lawyers.
There we go. So, that's what we'll agree.
Yeah. And so it's just so fascinating that it's like there's a great way to do this, and we just can't because of other things.
And every vaccine does it, and every treatment does that. Is not personalized at all, because there are going to be people who are non-responders, and that'll be what we can talk about measles in that 3 to
So
5%.
I'm sorry, just one step back. What's a non-responder?
And you don't necessarily get the immune response you need out of it. So
Interesting.
the first dose of measles that I give you, 7% probably won't get an effective immune response. We give you a second one to try to catch that, and that makes it more like 2 to 3%. So 2 to 3% are out there totally naive to measles. Okay, and that's why we talk about the importance of the herd immunity, because I can't protect everybody, but if we can kind of keep enough people up and keep that virus from circulating, if it's just banging around this car or this town, and there's enough people that it can just hit and fall flat, then we can keep the community healthy. But if we have more people out there that it can hit and take out, that's what you're going to see. And that's what we saw in Texas. It was more localized because in that county, I think there were still 86% of people immunized. But in that, I believe it was an Amish community, it was as low as 25 or 30% vaccinated. And that's why it spread like wildfire. So that's...
I don't know if we have the evidence or the science to back that claim up. That's what drives me nuts. It's like, it was a Mennonite community, right?
Mennonite, excuse me.
Yeah. No, you're good. And I don't know the difference between Mennonites and Amish. I will look it up by the time we air this episode, and then I'll fill it in. But no, I'm with you. And that's the thing. It's like, well, that's why it spread so fast, is because they weren't vaccinated. But to your point, we also have communities that have a high vaccine rate, and they still get breakouts, right? So it's like, that doesn't actually hold universally, I don't think. Unless I'm wrong. I could be wrong.
It depends on the bug. Okay, it depends on the germ. It depends
So for measles specifically.
Measles is one of the most virulent, if not the most virulent virus we have out there right now.
And virulent means
Meaning it is
easily to catch, right?
easy to catch. It hangs around in rooms for a while, circulates in the air, and yeah, it's tough. Now,
And I'm sorry to jump in with one more question.
Yeah,
so
go ahead.
measles is so important to pediatricians because it particularly, children are very susceptible. Or
Correct.
Got you.
Correct.
Okay, I'm caught up. Okay. Thank you.
They can be susceptible, especially unimmunized. And again, we don't see the complications like we used to. I think if we did, obviously in this day and age, it would be all over social media and things like that.
So hold there, and this is a loaded question, so you can push back. I don't mean to trigger you right before the conference, but you said we don't see as many harsh side effects, I think is what you said, right? As we used to.
Well, not side effects. I was talking about of the disease.
Of the
Implications
disease.
of the disease.
So we don't, and is that true even for this low vaccinated Mennonite community?
Yeah. Did you see much of the pictures of those that were infected? And here's
No,
the
I
things.
didn't. I'll have to look those up.
What's interesting is I've tried to put together a talk, and I can't find any people that really remember seeing measles that much, older physicians, and you really can't find a ton. Back then we had old black and white pictures or some color pictures, but you don't have like the videos or things like that to show the encephalitis. It's hard to put that in front of you and say, this is why it's so bad.
Yeah.
That's it for today's ride. Huge thanks to the passengers who let me share their stories. The show wouldn't exist without you.
If you enjoyed listening in, come join me over on my Substack, where you can support the podcast and be part of the community. Thanks for riding along. I'll see you next time.